So the U.S. economy is actually in a pretty interesting point right now. You got gold reaching all-time highs. You have inevitable crash on the price of gold. Why though? I mean, we all know the markets are manipulated, guys. It's because the contracts are coming up, and if you're a big holder in gold, aka banks holding billions of dollars in gold, and the contracts are going to expire at an all-time high, you're going to instantly go bankrupt if you can't afford to pay them. Okay, we got the American citizens that can't really get jobs, or AI is either taking their job or severely lowering the amount of money that a company is willing to pay a person for that job because AI can produce more. We got so many businesses failing, and with businesses failing, people can't get work, and the people can't get work can't eat. You know how it goes. So Michael Bordenaro is going to tell us about what's happening in the U.S. economy. Let's get to it.
Most people have no idea that this happened recently, but the United States now officially owes more money than its entire economy produces in a single year. And this is a major crossover and really milestone that we should be paying attention to, because this has significant impacts on our entire future as a country. Because when countries hit this point, history shows it never ends well. Now, this doesn't mean everything's going to completely collapse tomorrow, but it almost always means that something is going to have to break. Maybe we're going to be slapped with a much higher tax bill pretty soon from the government. We're going to see much higher inflation, or we could see spending cuts. Unlikely, probably the first two. And that ends up making life harder for everybody, as if things aren't already hard right now. So we're at a point where some level of crisis is inevitable at this point in time. Now that we have crossed this threshold where the national debt has officially hit 100% of GDP, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget says that we are now on an unsustainable trajectory. Well, we were already on an unsustainable trajectory before. They're just now waking up and saying that. The interesting thing is even though we're going to have this warning from an official government agency, likely nothing's going to be done. In fact, they're probably just going to keep pushing things in an even more extreme direction. We're going to borrow more.
So, of course, they're going to keep pushing things. One, because the people who are affected first are the poor people. The people who don't live in gated communities or popular areas of safety, all right? And then you also have to realize that these big tech guys or rich people like who run the Federal Reserve, or the higher ups, the elites, as they're called, that are behind the printing of the U.S. dollar or behind the system of the government, no, one, they have options, and two, that the crash or this economic effect isn't going to take as much toll on them as the poor guys. But also, especially when they're older and they've been around, they're like in their 60s and 70s, guys, they're going to be dead soon. Not to really harp on anybody's death, but they're like, we get the best of America, they get the worst of it. We're going to be dead by then. So it is what it is. And that's just the mindset that I believe that they have when it comes down to the country crashing, because what does this country mean to you if you're not alive? You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people really have that mindset.
More. We're going to print more. We're going to have more inflation until the whole thing blows up. So at this point, we are no longer talking about if the economy is going to break. We're talking about how it breaks at this point. Basically the different types of scenarios that can play out. So the first thing is there's the potential political panic scenario. This is where investors lose confidence in U.S. finances, kind of something we're seeing lately with the weakening of the U.S. dollar and the surge in gold and silver prices, and lawmakers get forced into sudden extreme spending cuts or massive tax hikes. And we're going to talk a little bit later in this video about the potential tax hikes that could be on its way. But here's the problem. When you do this to an already weak economy like we have right now, this can cause a depression level of economic slowdown. That's why so many people have been calling this a depression for a while now. Forget about recession. This is what a depression looks like. Even if we just see a fiscal contraction.
And if you've been watching the news recently, they don't even want to refer to what's actually happening as a recession, right? They're trying to change the definitions of all sorts of things, but just keeping it financial. A depression is 6 quarters of GDP downfall, and 2 quarters of GDP downfall is called a recession. So and then there's like stagflation and stuff like that, but when GDP is the main metric of how this is calculated, and you're taking human revenues or humans' livelihood not into effect, people get overlooked. You got to realize that the economic, let's just talk about the housing market crash in 2008. If you haven't watched the movie The Big Short, but it's a really good movie that kind of explains it all. Not kind of, explains it all well. But what actually happens is that it's like a house of cards, and once the foundation starts to crumble and crack, everything at the top starts to fall down with it. Now, I think the U.S. housing market crash was just a baby, was just a real life scenario, true enough, but a small picture of what can actually happen to a country, and especially with the tech boom. So I don't know. I really feel like that they're either going to try to save it with technology somehow, which the people will suffer from, or it'll crash and only a few people survive, which inevitably most people suffer from. It's actually pretty scary.
Equal to 5% of GDP, that says we will put us in a worse recession than anything we have seen at least since 1950, which means 2008 also looks like a walk in the park if this scenario plays out.
All recessions aren't made the same.
Real world scenario where this happened not that long ago was actually in Greece in the 2010s. They had bond yields explode over there. They had emergency measures implemented by the government. Unemployment soared and the living standards absolutely collapsed. And a similar but smaller crisis also played out in Portugal and in Spain. The second thing that could happen is the bond market breaks. If investors start questioning US treasuries, then interest rates spike sharply, bond values collapse, and banks holding those bonds suffer major losses.
And now think about it. Remember, the housing market crashed. The banks were bailed out. Some went out, but like Lehman Brothers, I think they went out in 2008. But the banks are going to get bailed out. Why? Because the financial structure is what keeps America going. It's not really the people. The illusion of people keeping this country going is what they want the average person to believe. But when it comes down to the bond markets, what are they going to do? Print more money again? Even if that does work, because I don't know how the system really works in a situation like that, but it's not going to be sustainable. It's like pumping air into a mattress that has a hole in it. Eventually the hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more pressure you put on the mattress after you lay on it, and to a point where no matter how much air you pump into the mattress, it's never going to fully inflate. So with the economy getting to that point, as a individual or as somebody who wants a family or has a family, you need to be able to properly prepare for this. One, not being in debt, okay? Two, having a source of income that you can control, okay? And then a community is also very important, having other people around you. Being able to grow your own food and vegetation, waste, sewage, and stuff like that being taken care of, okay? And then the most important of all of these is faith in Christ, faith in God. That even if none of the first 4 or 5 things I just mentioned happens, that there's a place for you in heaven, right? Because you can stress about this stuff, but you got to remember that the mark of the beast and stuff is coming. Wars and other things are coming. When? I don't know, but they are. The Bible tells us this stuff. So I wouldn't stress too much about it, but I would also properly prepare to make sure that, we can make this walk in this earth as simple and easy as possible. Not only for you, but for the people that come after you,
We could see more bank failures and bailouts or bail-ins. In fact, what we saw in 2023 was Silicon Valley Bank and a couple of other banks that I don't remember the names of that actually failed in early 2023. Is this a small preview of what could actually happen? The rapid rate hikes broke a few of these banks and the government came in and bailed these people out, right? But if this happens on a massive scale, well, that's an entirely different story. And actually the most recent example we can look at that's kind of similar to this is when we had home values collapse by about 30% over 5 years, unemployment hit 10%, and economic output shrank by 4%, and it took many years to recover, even with a massive amount of government stimulation. They held interest rates at near zero for well over a decade, and we weren't dealing with major inflation problems back then either. So even in ideal scenarios, it still took a long time to recover. The next thing that could happen, which I think is probably the most likely scenario, is print, 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 baby. In order to avoid defaults or bank failures, then the Fed is probably going to be pressured to print money to buy more government debt. This is known as monetizing the debt. And the consequences of this is that inflation accelerates severely, savings lose value overnight, and purchasing power absolutely collapses.
A lot of people don't realize that the inflation that we're seeing is compound interest over time, but a lot of it is because of COVID. So much money was printed during COVID that prices of things went up severely. So, you got to work twice as hard for the same thing, especially if you never got a raise, if you never learned a way to make more money. That's pretty important to realize, guys.
And that's what we have all experienced over the past 5 years. That's why life, as you know it, has become completely unaffordable, seemingly overnight. We're going to essentially face this cliff where the US is going to say, do you print more money or do you let a debt crisis happen? We already pretty much know what choice they're going to make. And by the way, today I'm in Brittany Bay Park, walking along the waterfront here, along the Intracoastal Waterway. The next scenario, which is also kind of starting to play out right now, is a currency crisis where the dollar loses all of its value and its power. You know, many countries are already starting to abandon the US dollar due to all of our recent threats towards other countries, as well as the tariff policies. And so this excessive debt and recklessness is triggering a sharp decline in the US dollar that we're seeing right now. And a weaker dollar means higher import prices, higher inflation, and reduced global influence, especially if we lose the world reserve currency status. But there's also a potential of a default crisis. What does this mean?
Folks, let the United States lose the world the world reserve currency status. You're gonna see this country flipped upside down. We owe so much. I think if something like that were to happen, honestly, I believe that the United States would immediately skip second world country and go to straight third world country status, okay? Because one, our education is failing, okay? We got children that can't even read on their grade level. Our infrastructure is not up to date. Like in Japan, you know, or other places, transportation is easier to access for people without proper means of transportation. We have the housing market in shambles. Most people with decent paying jobs cannot afford a house, okay? And a car at that. We have people who don't trust the government. Most people I know, when I ask them if they trust the government, they'll say no, okay? Don't trust the police force, the task force, right? Court systems are screwing people over left and right just to keep money flowing through their pockets instead of doing what's right and justified. The dating market is horrible. So the likelihood of people growing up in two-parent households with children and stuff is actually almost is closer to zero more now than it ever has been before, which is it's just not a good thing. Like why are the morals and things collapsing? Everybody worships a dollar, and if you don't worship a dollar, you can't even afford to live. Not so much that you should worship a dollar. That's not the point I'm making, but the cost of living is so high that people who don't even care to have a lot of money still have to work endlessly, multiple jobs, DoorDash, Uber, and things like that for money. They have to, right? And this is why I'm emphasizing, guys, join the free community down below, 7 or better. Make sure you reach out to me. If you really want to learn how to make some money, I do it in the trading space, but I'm also learning the AI to make sure I don't get left behind. But we need to start locking in together, guys. We need to start building something together so that when this happens, because it's inevitably gonna happen, that we are the least affected. Just being real, you know, the only way it doesn't happen is if people all come together as a conglomerate and fight this system. Get the right politicians and people in place. But losing the world reserve currency, I feel like, man, that'll be the end of America, at least as we know it.
It essentially means that the US defaults on its $38 trillion in debt. So if the government fails to pay and they default on the debt, then the global credit markets could essentially freeze up, the stock market could crash, and there's probably going to be a worldwide recession or /depression. Other countries have done this in the past, like Argentina, Mexico, Brazil.
That's actually insane that if the US economy crashes, that other countries are also affected. Why? Because the US forces a lot of other countries to use the US dollar as their form of currency, because their currency is so minuscule or they don't even have one. So imagine you have to use a currency that you can't print. The US uses a currency that they can print, and they can prolong their problems. That's why a lot of other countries are having immediate problems, because they are using a currency that they don't own and that they can't print, they can't stimulate. It's hard for them to do so. So the US basically has their big foot on the neck of these other countries. And when we run into problems, we just bail out our own people. Or the US bails out its own people. But when other countries run into financial problems, how can they bail them out?
And Russia and Argentina still dealing with the fallout decades after their last default. So this can have major consequences on the economy.
Now, decades. Notice he said decades after their last default. This isn't something that's going to last one generation.
The other scenario I think could be the most likely besides print is the slow bleed, which could be where we're at right now. It's kind of hard to gauge where we're at because some of these things are already happening right now. But the slow bleed is where nothing dramatic happens. There's no immediate crash, but the high debt becomes a huge problem and economic growth slows down year after year. And the living standards.
This is bringing it back to 2008, guys. The slow bleed, it was never like a bubble that just keeps filling it with air. It's an ever-expanding bubble, but at some point it's going to pop because it can't handle the pressure of air that's inside it anymore. It's like a balloon. You know, some will have more elasticity than others. I would say the U.S. economy is a more elastic balloon than the housing market balloon, obviously because it's a bigger economy and so many more industries use the economy. I mean, it's the housing market is just one industry in the economy. So it's only a portion of the bigger picture. So eventually when it does pop, because it's not being ran correctly, that the downfall or the consequences is going to be the U.S. dollar really crashing and burning, and people are left in shambles. Not only in this country, but other countries as well. Just got to make sure I re-emphasize that point.
Of everybody kind of declines year after year, which I think a lot of people can relate to and say this is probably happening to them. In fact, they're saying that real income per person could be 8% lower by 2050 than it is right now. This is sort of what happened in Japan. Japan had extremely high debt for decades. They avoided a collapse, but the real GDP growth averages 0.5% per year, and their economy has completely stagnated. I'm not saying just one of these things can happen, guys. Like in reality, we can see many of these things play out all at once, and the effect that it's going to have is still unknown. We can look at some of these historical examples and say this happened there and that happened over here, but this is the United States we're talking about, which is currently still the most powerful country in the world. So this is going to affect us in a stronger way than it does some of these smaller nations. And the worst part is, no matter who you vote for, no matter who's in Congress, no matter who's the president at this point, all of them seem to have their interests aligned in keeping this magic show on the road for as long as possible. No recent administration or Congress members have done anything to make an impact on the most glaring problems that we're all facing right now. None of them say, oh yeah, let's stop spending, let's really cut spending. It looked like that was going to happen at first with the Doge department, but that barely made a dent in anything. And obviously when you pass a bill like the big beautiful spending bill, then that really doesn't move the needle on reducing national debt either. It just fuels it into the future, guaranteeing that our national debt's going to go up. So no one's serious about knocking this problem out. Everybody just wants it to keep going so that they can get theirs in the meantime. As long as the people who are in charge now can continue to profit and benefit from this situation, which they really are, then they're going to continue down this path, guys. Nothing is going to change until
they don't have to deal with the problem. Hey, we're going to cause the problem because causing the problem is fun. Like, I'm still going to go get to play golf. I get to have as many women or whatever I want. I get to have as much cars or travel as much as I want to. Off your back, you're done, right? And when this problem eventually bursts, let them deal with it. We'll be long dead by now, or by then. Who cares, right? If we don't, the average person like me doesn't realize that. And we're in the middle class. I know what's going on. I see what's happening, but the likelihood that I have enough leadership and enough, influence over the masses to make a change. Nah.
Till these guys are forced into submission because things just get to a point where it's so bad. And to illustrate for you how bad it is right now, the U.S. debt now equals $229,000 per household, and a hefty tax hike could be on the horizon in order to circumvent this. So who pays for all this fiscal irresponsibility? Well, you and I do. We get lucky to be stuck with the bill. In fact, the average American household share of the federal debt is now equal to roughly half the value of their home. This is no longer just a government problem. This is a household balance sheet problem. Today, if families had to pay interest on this debt at today's 3.36% rate from the Federal Reserve, that would equal $7,700 per year per household. That's roughly 9% of the average household income of $85,000 a year. And that's just the interest, guys. We're not even talking about paying down the debt. We're just talking about debt service at this point. And the crazy thing is, all of this just happened, in the past 5 or 6 years, because from 2013 to 2019, the debt to GDP ratio stayed pretty stable around 75%. But then once they implemented these massive COVID stimulus packages, that completely flipped it upside down. And then the interest rates turned a bad problem into an even worse one because our economy got so used to having basically 0% interest rates and everything was functioning as if that was the normal, okay? But what happened was the 2-year Treasury bill went from 0.22% in 2021 to about 3.6%. And this caused interest rates to triple. So this is yet another government-backed crisis. This has all been artificially created by our leaders, because borrowing at this point is growing faster than the economy, like we just talked about. In fact, it jumped 81% over the past 5 years. Our GDP and economic growth definitely didn't jump by 81% in the past 5 years. In fact, they say that our borrowing is outspending our income by about 40%. And if things stay on the current trajectory, instead of the debt to GDP ratio being at 100%, by 2035, it's going to be at 135%. And that would put us at around $60 trillion in national debt, meaning that we could be the next Greece. Also, if we have $60 trillion in national debt, that's about...
So let's say this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen regardless, which I believe it is, but you know, can't tell the future. Where should we take our children? What should we do? We should have like dual citizenship, right? Right? Like we should have a US citizenship, and then where's the second country that we should go that our children should be able to grow up in and get familiar with? You know, because you got to put class into perspective, race into perspective, your job into perspective when it comes like that. Unless you just want to say, hey, you want to be like them and say, look, I didn't create this problem, but I'm not going to do anything to solve it, or I'm not going to do anything to mitigate the issues you're going to have to deal with in a few years. Same thing some of your parents have done with you, or you know, I think it's really something like to really think about. I'm smiling because it's like it's challenging. I like the challenge, but the crazy part is it should never have gotten this bad. This is insane.
About $434,000 per household, which is more than the median home price of around $410,000, guys. So what's the plan at that point? Confiscate everybody's home, pay off the national debt? That's probably going to be the only real option left at that point. Then you'll really own nothing and be happy. The worst part is there is no actual plan to get out of this mess right now. No one's dealing with it. No politician cares about it. No one's interested in cutting spending. No one's serious about it. Also, raising taxes is a tricky thing because people don't want to see their taxes go up. And the moment you say you're going to do that, well, good luck getting votes from anyone. But instead, what they're doing is they're just borrowing more, which puts an even larger burden on all.
It's when you print as much money as you want, but you're saying you don't have enough money, that's a problem. Remember, there was a lot of people mad that the U.S. people who were in charge were sending billions of dollars to Palestine and other countries to fund wars. There are a lot of people who are upset that so much money is going to, time and attention is going to Venezuela. There's so many people upset that the U.S. is putting an embassy in most other people's countries, right? Yet ignoring the problems here. And the reason is because these guys don't see the same problems that you see. You're in the same country, but if you realize how this country was started, they look at you as a lesser than. You're not in the same class as them. We don't operate off of classism, but that's how they operate themselves. They don't care about you. As long as your back works enough and you keep producing enough children and their back works enough to be able to carry the load for them, that's fine. They're enjoying what America is because America to them is a slave ground where the people at the top win. The people at the top get to enjoy life. You don't get to tell yourself no to any pleasures, and you can afford everything because we print the money here. Okay, we have our working class working to keep this thing up and flowing, and we have a military that can put mostly anybody in check that got a problem with it.
All of us, and instead of raising our taxes, they just create more inflation. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario moving forward, combined with an increase in taxes, because they're always increasing taxes. They never lower federal taxes, right? So you're always going to see an increase in taxes. You're always going to see an increase in inflation. And between both of those, they hope that it's just enough to continue the magic show on the road a little bit longer until we're not in office, until it's someone else's problem. But they can only go down that path for so long, guys, because what happens is eventually the bond market will push back. We kind of saw a little bit of this happen over the past year or two, but at some point the bond buyers might demand much higher yields than we're at currently, or refuse to fund the deficits altogether, which leads to definitely having much higher taxes and more inflation and essential spending cuts if we want to actually keep the government in one piece. And I know this could be another topic that old timers say, well, they've been talking about this for years, but this time it really is different because never has it been anywhere close to this bad with no real exit strategy. You know, we don't have a way to get out of this, guys. Even if we cut down spending dramatically, it would still take a very long time to dig ourselves out of this mess. And clearly no one's willing to do that. So if we're not willing to do it voluntarily, at some point, it's going to be forced upon us. That's what I see happening. And we're already starting to see signs of that right now. Now let's shift gears a little bit to the job market, because here's something I thought was kind of interesting, because we're always talking about all the economic data, and a lot of this economic data comes from economists, right? But the job market right now is so bad that even economists are having a hard time finding jobs. Economists themselves are now saying that this is
Wow.
the worst job market young economists have ever seen. The people who come up with all the economic data and study the
Ain't that for a resume, right? They getting first-hand experience. I'm just not funny, but that's crazy.
labor market are now being affected by the slow labor market. And more economists agree that this labor market today is worse than what we saw during the pandemic, and all the jobs for economists are drying up at once. You have the federal funding uncertainty, so universities are reducing or freezing hiring. They typically hire economists. The federal government hiring has totally dried up, which is a traditional major employer for economists. And also, private sector demand has pulled back substantially in finance and consulting, and tech firms are hiring fewer economists. So it's like the perfect storm for economists no longer having work. As of December of 2025, there were only 1,773 openings for PhD level economists. That's lower than the year before and about 20% below where it was in 2020. Take a look at this chart here that shows you the steady decline of the amount of economists that are looking to get hired right now. Full-time academic jobs are down 33% year over year. Federal government listings only show 24 jobs right now, down.
This goes back to, wow, I put all this money in to go to school. Worst case, I mean, even if you didn't owe any debt, right? You still wasted however many years you put into it, guys. But the thing that's the most sickening of them all is when you go to school for something, you put years of your time into it, money into it, and you owe a debt bill for a degree that you can't use. That is you're basically paying for what? For some information that's irrelevant, that's useless to you. Wow. Wow. You might as well just go get a job and pay somebody else's rent. You'll be better off.
Down from 84 the year before, and business and finance roles are weak for the third straight year in a row right now. And they say that normally the job market absorbs all the new PhDs that are looking for a job, but not this time. U.S. economic programs produce roughly 1,300 PhDs per year. Now that's no longer the case. Hey, check it out. The drawbridge is going up. I'll show you guys this for a second.
What good is a finance degree if everybody?
So just like many other hopeful college students that enter college.
True, everybody's not broke, but you got to realize that most people are. So all this finance, but people just trying to get back to break even. They're trying to get above water. You talking about investing? What am I invest if I'm in a bunch of debt? If I got a bunch of debt, I ain't nothing to invest in, bro. I got bills to pay at the end of the month. I'm saving money for later, but I gotta make it to later, bro. I gotta make sure I got food, electricity, and a place to stay so I don't die trying to get to my retirement.
College 5 to 6 years ago, now they're graduating with these big degrees that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're expecting strong demand, they're expecting high pay and plenty of options, but instead they are graduating into one of the worst job markets in decades. According to MIT Economics, they say that students are getting about 1/3 fewer interviews than last year. Employers have too many people to choose from now, and they have all the leverage. And one of the problems that this creates is you have people who are qualified for these really high-paying jobs, often multiple six-figure economic jobs, okay, that now are forced to apply for lower-paying roles that would normally go to somebody else. And it has this domino effect down the chain, where people that are overqualified for jobs continue to apply for those jobs because that's all that's available. So if economists can't find jobs right now, it makes me wonder if a lot of these economists are going to stop putting out these bogus reports on the.
So what he's saying is, imagine going to school to be a judge, but all the people who are qualified to be judges are just settling to be lawyers. I'm qualified to be a judge, but I'm gonna just settle for being a lawyer because I can compete. You know what I mean? I'm an NFL player, but I'm a play on a college football team because I can compete, right? Because there's gonna be a place for me, right? A middle schooler doing elementary school work, it's the same. It's a manager taking an employee position. Well, a manager is an employee, but a basic position. Or somebody who's a business owner, working a job somewhere else as a business professional for somebody else because they overqualify, because they can compete. Pushing the guys who just barely qualify out of their spot. Superstar versus all-star versus average player. What you gonna do about it? Go back to school and get more degrees? Overqualify yourself? Nah. Folks, them days are over. You gotta start your own business. You gotta start your own thing. And you better get it while the getting's good. And it's maybe not as good as it used to be, or maybe it's better than it used to be. But at the end of the day, it's available for you to be able to build and grow your own personal brand, grow your own business, partnering up with other people who understand the same thing and the same mindset that you have. so that y'all can build together.
Economy and start living in reality. Now that so many of them are facing the same reality as regular people out there looking for a job, you can't just sit there in your ivory tower and talk about how good things are because you're making a great salary and you're being paid to look.
Easy to have that conversation with, but once everything below you starts falling, once your layers of safety start slowly dwindling away, you can build these layers of safety all you want, but the inevitable is going to happen. You better take care of the people at the bottom so that they will do just enough or be happy to do the job that keeps the building afloat. You got to take care of your foundation, and they're not doing that. They're not doing it because what happens is when somebody quits, they say, "Oh, you're replaceable," or people are so desperate enough that they won't quit, and they're too weak to even fight to make it better for them. You know what unions do? People going on strike all the time.
Look the other way. I think a lot of these economists who are graduating who can't find a job should start their own economic forecasting models, should start their own businesses reporting on what's really going on in the economy to increase transparency on what's going on out there because now they finally have to live it too. So at the end of the day, guys, I don't know when this...
Which would, if they did that, more people would tune in because people want authenticity. They don't want a caked up, makeup faced man or woman sitting on a news channel reading from a teleprompter no more, bro. People want authenticity because life is getting that real. The illusion is over. People's real eyes are opening to what's actually happening within our economy, for real. And they're also seeing, but the ones that are actually seeing a solution to the problem are taking action, and that's even better for the economy and your families.
This whole thing's going to come crashing down, but it looks like it's going to at some point because nobody has a clear plan to fix it. No one's willing to do what it really takes to fix it when it comes to really reducing the spending in a meaningful way. So, I made a video, a month or two ago, about, what ChatGPT suggests to do in order to fix the national debt problems. And basically all of those solutions are things that are probably never going to happen. There were a lot of good ideas in there, but they're just things that the real people in charge are not willing to do. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you
For sure, guys, that's Michael Bordenaro. I am too tall, man. I really hope y'all enjoyed the video, but please leave a subscribe down below if you really enjoyed this. If you want to continue to learn with me, I'm gonna stay consistent in this area because I'm looking to build a community where we can thrive together. So every person counts. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, Too Tall out.
don't want to wait for my next video,